And I think Mark Carney is having a bit of a Cinderella Kamala Harris moment where it's anybody but Justin Trudeau. But as we get into this campaign, Canadians are going to see who's going to actually change the economy and get us on the right track. We've lost almost a decade of productivity, of competitiveness, of having an ideologically driven economic policy coming out of the federal government. And honestly, Mark Carney's fingerprints are all over it. He was Justin Trudeau's chief economic advisor during this whole time.
Folks, there's just no other word but shameless to describe Mark Carney. He started off his campaign by taking some of the policies from the Conservatives, like axing the tax, and taking credit for that. And now he is parroting Pierre's talking points in his own speech, at especially his closing of his speech. Take a listen to what he said today.
And that includes, at its core, a better, more affordable life for every Canadian. For generations, Canadians have built this great country on the idea that if you work hard, like the people here at New Flyer, if you work hard, you should be able to afford a good life, a good job that covers the bills, have a good home in a welcoming and safe community. And it's the duty of my government and governments at all levels to make that promise a reality. Under a new Liberal government, we will build a Canada you can afford. We will build an independent future for our country stronger than ever. We will build Canada strong.
Now I'm watching this press conference and I hear this and I said, wait a second, that sounds very familiar.
It is time to restore the Canadian promise for a change, a promise that hard work gets you a great life in a beautiful house on a safe street under a proud flag. Canada first for a change.
So after seeing and hearing that, the article that came out last week by the National Post about Mark Carney plagiarizing his doctoral thesis for Harvard has a little bit more oomph behind it, because this guy has now taken policies from the Conservatives as his own. He's now parroting and mimicking portions of Pierre's speech in his own speech. This guy, like I said, he's just shameless. But not only that, he's very, very smug. You see it all the time. But today he was questioned about the Paul Chang situation that we reported on earlier. And listen to his response.
Okay.
Good morning. Next question. Good morning, Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. It appears the involvement of the RCMP forced candidate Paul Chang to bow out of the race. Meanwhile, the Conservatives just removed their problematic candidate in Windsor within an hour of learning of issues of this individual. Why didn't you do the same with Chang? And was this a teachable moment for you?
Mr. Chang made his resignation, offered his resignation last night. I accepted it. As I said yesterday, his comments were deeply troubling and regrettable. We will move on with looking for a new candidate for Markham, and I'll leave it at that.
And he will leave it at that. No accountability. This guy can't say that, yes, it was a teachable moment. I should have got rid of him when this first came out. Nothing like that. He just says, I'll leave it at that. Now, there's no way that Paul Chang decided to just resign on his own, especially after you just backed him saying, no, he's going to stay in that position. You for sure made him, if not him, the Liberal Party itself likes to push people out that seem to be a problem. Look at Chandra Arya and Ruby Dalla. They definitely did this to Paul Chang. Because even Tom Mulcair on CTV today said the same thing. He was like, there's no way he resigned on his own.
I really appreciate the time this morning, Tom. This is interesting because Mark Carney went out of his way yesterday to defend Paul Chang, saying, I accept his apology. This is a terrible mistake, et cetera, but I'm hanging on. And then by 11 o'clock last night, Chang pulls out of the race. There seems like a disconnect there, but also that Mark Carney really spent a lot of time and created a lot of controversy along the way.
Yeah, this has become, unfortunately, a problem on Carney's campaign. Things make it up to his level that should not get anywhere near him. And when he made that statement yesterday, I was doing a radio show with our colleagues in Toronto. And I said, look, there's no way that decision will be maintained. It's impossible for that candidate to stay in the race. Now, there was a bit of a face saving involved. He's the one who says he's withdrawn, but let's not kid ourselves. He was told that he had to withdraw, otherwise he'd be pushed out. It was an incredible mistake by the campaign. How did they let that get to Carney? And what was Carney doing in front of a microphone talking about an individual candidate? You just had the example of a Conservative candidate being given the heave-ho. You don't see Pierre Poilievre all over this thing.
And after seeing Paul Chang's letter last night, I knew that's exactly what happened. The Liberals realized what they put themselves into, what kind of a position they were in, especially with having Mark Carney out there tooth and nail defending this guy. For him to then just say, I don't want to be a distraction, I'm going to resign. Hours after it was announced that an RCMP investigation may be happening into this whole situation. And then the next day, Mark Carney just says, well, he called me to resign and that's that. No, guys, you definitely pushed him out. But as you heard from Tom, there was a story that broke today about a Conservative candidate who was trying to run. And there's some audio that got resurfaced of him saying something about Trudeau should be kind of And this was the story on that.
CTV News has learned that a Conservative candidate who joked that former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau should receive the death penalty will no longer be running for the party in the election. In an episode of a comedy podcast recorded at the end of the Freedom Convoy, Mark McKenzie voiced his support for public hangings, mentioning Trudeau's name as a case where the death penalty should be applied. A Conservative campaign spokesperson this morning issued a statement calling the comments clearly unacceptable and announcing that McKenzie will not be the Conservative candidate in the riding of Windsor-Tecumseh Lakeshore.
Now, it is quite interesting that the mainstream media has jumped all over this Conservative candidate story immediately, but it did take them quite a while to get the whole Paul Chiang thing into the news cycle. I'm guessing they were hoping maybe it would just be swept under the rug, but as Tom Mulcair pointed out, Pierre Poilievre is not out here today talking about that or making any sort of announcements. He actually was pointing out the energy sector and problems that it has, especially with Mark Carney and the Liberals not repealing 5 major things that a large amount of companies has come out saying, you need to get rid of these.
And now Mr. Carney wants the Liberals to get a 4th term while promising the same radical keep-it-in-the-ground policies. And by the way, on that, let me be clear. When I say he has a keep-it-in-the-ground policy, that is not my characterization of his position. I'm going to quote him verbatim. This is not Justin Trudeau or Stephen Guilbeault. This is Mark Carney. Maybe as much as half of oil reserves, proven oil reserves, need to stay in the ground. You hear that? He wants to keep it in the ground, and that includes under the ocean floor. That means that he will not allow any offshore development here in Newfoundland. To keep it in the ground, he would have to block any further projects from going ahead. That means that our single biggest and most valuable resource would not be available to us while the Americans unleash massive production increases and while Mr. Carney's own company profits off petroleum investments outside of Canada. He will shut down competition to his company here in this country. So again, here we have it. Let me just stand over here so everyone can see this. Here we have it, folks. These are all the demands. These are all the demands that our energy sector has made. These are not my demands. These demands come from the 14 biggest energy companies in Canada. They're the ones that put a letter together, and they've said very clearly and very simply, it's not a matter of debate. Either you do these 5 things, or we will stay dependent on the Americans. There is no way to build pipelines, LNG plants, to harvest our resources unless we do these 5 things. Mr. Carney, he has made some vague mutterings about how he might be inclined to change his position that he took over the last decade. But it's time for him to get specific. Will he reverse himself? I ask you to pose that question to him directly. And if his answer is anything but yes, then if he's not willing to say that he's abandoning all of his principles and his policies, then you can be very sure that under a 4th Liberal term, Our energy sector will continue to be crushed, and the Americans will continue to win our money, our jobs, our energy at huge discounts. It is no wonder that Donald Trump is so determined to see Mark Carney stay in power.
Now, I don't see how the climate fanatic is going to get around any of this whole energy situation, because this guy talks about how he wants to increase our interprovincial trade. We have to be less reliant on the U.S. We need to diversify. But we can't even get a pipeline from the west to the east without going through the U.S., who could potentially cut us off from our own supply. And when asked today about Bill C-69, which is the no new pipeline bill, he said he wouldn't get rid of it.
How do you reconcile keeping Bill C-69 with your plans to build infrastructure in Canada? Do you plan to repeal Bill C-69?
We do not plan to repeal Bill C-69, to answer your question directly. What we have said and made very clear 10 days ago, formally with the First Minister's meeting, is that we will move for projects of national interest to remove duplication in terms of environmental assessments and other approvals, and we will follow, as the federal government, the principle of one project, one approval to move forward from that. And so what's essential is to work at this time of crisis to come together as a nation, all levels of government, to focus on those projects that are going to make material differences to our country, to Canadian workers, and to our future, and work closely together. And the federal government is looking to lead with that by saying we will accept provincial environmental assessments to move forward with that for example, clean energy projects or conventional energy projects. There are many others that could be there.
And this is the guy who wants to run our country and tell us that we are going to get stronger than the Americans, yet we still rely on them for the energy because we can't bring our major resource from one end of the country to the other without going through them. Make it make sense, folks. But with that being said, I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. If you can, hit the subscribe button. Would really appreciate it. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.